Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. Several new movies opened this weekend that ended on March 24th, 2024, but only 2 of them earned enough revenue to be in this weekend's top 5 movies at the domestic box office. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire opened domestically this weekend in the top spot, as well as in several foreign movie markets this weekend, but its box office revenue is weak. Dune Part 2 remained in second place in its 4th weekend at the box office, and its total box office revenue has now put the movie in the black. Kung Fu Panda 4 dropped to the number 3 spot in this weekend's domestic box office after enjoying the top spot for the past 2 consecutive weekends. And then there's Madame Web, which slid even further into obscurity as it dropped all the way down to 21st place overall, and this is only its 6th weekend at the domestic box office, which I suspect may be its last. But before proceeding, I'd like to ask everyone to please like this video, please subscribe to this channel, and please press the bell to receive notifications. Thanks! We'll first do a quick recap of this weekend's top 5 movies at the domestic box office. In first place in this weekend's domestic box office was Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, which opened with $45.2 million in earnings domestically. Internationally, the movie earned $16.4 million, but it hasn't yet opened in all international markets yet. So globally, the movie has currently earned $61.6 million. In second place was Dune Part 2, which earned another $17.6 million domestically to bring its current domestic box office total up to $233.4 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $51.6 million to bring its current international box office total up to $341 million. So globally, the movie earned another $79.6 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $574.4 million, which is currently $143.1 million more than what the 2021 Dune movie earned globally. In third place was Kung Fu Panda 4, which earned another $16.8 million domestically to bring its current domestic box office total up to $133.2 million. Internationally, it earned another $66.2 million, which is more than last week's international box office earnings, thanks in part to it now being open in China. So the movie's current international box office total is up to $134.9 million. Globally, the movie has earned another $91.7 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $268.2 million. Coming in fourth place this weekend was another newcomer, the low-budget horror movie Immaculate, which earned $5.4 million domestically, but has no reported international box office earnings yet. And finally, coming in fifth place at this weekend's domestic box office was the relatively low-budget Mark Wahlberg movie Arthur the King, which earned another $4.4 million domestically to bring its current domestic box office total up to $14.6 million. No international box office has yet been reported for this movie. Going back to Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, this is the 5th movie within the Ghostbusters franchise, which began in 1984. Its $100 million production budget is $25 million more than the $75 million production budget that 2021's Ghostbusters Afterlife had, but was also $44 million less than the very high $144 million production budget that 2016's failed female-led Ghostbusters movie had. And with a $100 million production budget, when multiplied by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively, to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, as well as the additional costs of marketing the movie and other miscellaneous costs that the studio pays above and beyond the production budget, we get an estimated break-even point range of $250 million to $300 million. And for a movie that only took in $61.6 million during its opening weekend, that range may be an insurmountable hurdle for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire to overcome. So we'll need to project what the movie's final domestic and final global gross box office revenues might be. Since there are 4 previous movies, when I first looked at their overall average weekly drop and standard deviation, the average was quite low at only around 25%, but the standard deviation was more than 13%, which would create a range of possible average weekly drops that's over 26% wide and not particularly realistic. And the reason for that is the very low average weekly drop for the original 1984 Ghostbusters movie at only 5.61%, which is nowhere near the average weekly drops for the 3 movies that followed it. So to have a more realistic range of average weekly drops and a higher overall average for projecting the final domestic box office for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, I decided to exclude the average from the first movie and only use the average weekly drops from the previous 3. That gave me a much more realistic overall average weekly drop of 32.02% and a standard deviation of only 5.13%, which was less than half of the more than 13% standard deviation that I get if I include the average for the 1984 Ghostbusters movie. So using that more realistic overall average weekly drop of 32.02% and a standard deviation of 5.13%, that gives me a range of possible average weekly drops of 26.9% to 37.15%, which is a very reasonable range. And using that range in conjunction with the current domestic box office earnings for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, I can project that its final domestic box office revenue may range from $121.6 million at the low end, $141 million at the mid-range, and $167.5 million at the upper end. And using the movie's current domestic share of 73.38%, which I expect to drop as the movie opens in more countries and is well within one standard deviation of the franchise average domestic share of 63.46%, I am currently projecting a final global gross box office for the movie ranging from $165.8 million at the low end, $192.2 million at the mid-range, and $228.2 million at the upper end. So as of right now, and unless the movie starts to earn a lot more money from overseas, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is more than likely going to flop. And I say that for 2 reasons. First, the first 4 movies played in roughly 55 countries each, while Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is currently only listed to play in 35 countries. Second, the only Ghostbusters movie that appears to have been shown in China was 1989's Ghostbusters 2. The 2 most recent movies, 2021's Ghostbusters Afterlife and 2016's failed female-led Ghostbusters, did not play in China, which definitely reduced both movies' potential earnings. And since there's no indication that Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is going to play in China, that's also going to cut into its bottom line. Currently, the movie may lose as much as $21.8 million to $134.2 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when divided by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, means that the production companies behind it, which include Sony and Columbia Pictures, currently stand to lose anywhere from $10.9 million to $67.1 million, which doesn't shock me given that the 2016 female-led Ghostbusters was a huge flop, and 2021's Ghostbusters Afterlife may have only marginally broken even. So we'll see what happens with this movie in the coming weeks. Now going back to Dune Part 2, using the same range of possible average weekly drops from 32.86 to 42.86%, as I had used in previous week's projections, my revised projections for the movie's final domestic box office earnings now range from $271.5 million at the low end, $280.3 million at the mid-range, and $291.7 million at the upper end, which is a similar but slightly narrower range than last week's projections. And with the movie's domestic share dropping slightly again to 40.63%, I can project that the movie's final global gross box office revenue will probably range from $668.3 million at the low end, $689.9 million at the mid-range, and $717.8 million at the upper end, which is also a very similar but narrower range than what I had projected last week. Given that Dune Part 2 has an estimated break-even point ranging from $475 million to $570 million, which is calculated by multiplying its $190 million production budget by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively, since the movie's current global gross box office revenue has surpassed the upper estimated break-even point as of this weekend, Dune Part 2 has most likely broken even. Going back to Kung Fu Panda 4, this is the 4th movie in a franchise that has a franchise average weekly drop of only 28.52%, which is somewhat low, and its standard deviation is only 0.49%, which is incredibly low. In order to project how well Kung Fu Panda 4 might do domestically, I decided to multiply that standard deviation by 10 so that I could create a broader possible range of average weekly drops from 23.66% to 33.38%. And using that range, I can project that the final domestic box office earnings for Kung Fu Panda 4 may range from $183.7 million at the low end, $196.3 million at the mid-range, and $213.6 million at the upper end, which is a much lower range than what I had projected last week. But based on the movie's current domestic share of 49.68%, which is much lower than last week's domestic share of 61.05%, thanks to the movie opening in more countries, including China, I can project that the movie's final global gross box office will probably range from $369.7 million at the low end, $395.2 million at the mid-range, and $429.9 million at the upper end, which is close to last week's projection thanks to the drop in domestic share. Given that Kung Fu Panda 4 has a production budget of only $85 million, when multiplied by 2.5, we get an estimated mid-range break-even point of only $212.5 million. Thus, Kung Fu Panda 4 will most definitely break even thanks to its very low production budget. And finally, this will be one of my last updates for Sony's and Columbia Pictures' failed female-led Marvel movie Madame Web. Since the movie ended its international theatrical run 2 weeks ago and is only playing in a handful of US movie theaters now, the movie earned hardly any money this weekend. So I will simply report that its current domestic box office revenue is $43.8 million and its current global gross box office revenue is only $97.7 million. And it's not worth trying to project the movie's box office further since it may end its US run very soon. But Madame Web did break 2 records. First, it's the lowest grossing Marvel movie of all time domestically for Sony and Columbia Pictures, and it's also their lowest grossing Marvel movie of all time worldwide. So good riddance, Madame Web. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.